Hello, everybody. I'm Iain Docherty from the University of Stirling, where I'm Dean of the Institute for Advanced Studies and Professor of Public Policy and Governance. I'm a transport researcher. I've studied the impacts of transport and travel on the economy, on society, and the environment for more than 20 years now. So I'm delighted to have been asked today to give you a short introduction to transport in Scotland and its impact on our climate emissions. I'll start by talking about the state of play where we are today in terms of transport's impact on the environment. Then I'll talk about what a pathway to achieving net zero in the transport sector might look like, and then some of the critical challenges we'll have to overcome if we're going to get there. Transport and travel is one of the most important sectors in terms of its contribution to our emissions in Scotland. Almost 40% of all of our emissions are derived from how we move around. What's worse, in recent years, emissions from the transport and travel sector have been growing again. And of that 40% contribution to overall emissions, 40% of that comes from the use of the private car. If we look at how different modes of transport have been changing in terms of their contribution to emissions over recent years, we can see that some of them declined, buses, shipping. Some of them have grown very strongly. In particular, I'd point to aviation, but also light vans, and that's because of the rise of particularly internet shopping. So in short, transport travels roughly 40% of Scotland's carbon emissions. 40% of that 40% is cars. And at least pre-COVID, things were getting worse rather than better. And that in large part was because despite the fact that vehicles were becoming more efficient, we were using them much more and they were becoming bigger. So how might we get to net zero? Well, you may have seen recently that there's been some headlines about bringing forward even more quickly the shift from petrol and diesel cars to electric or hydrogen ones. And I'm sure you'll have seen many adverts that the car companies put out for their new technology. However, I think it's time that we had a bit of a reality check about the impact that that will really have. Even if we are able to change all of our vehicle fleet to no emissions vehicles at point of use, so electrics or hydrogens. First of all, that will probably take us quite a long time. The average lifespan of our car is about 13 to 14 years. But also because of the embedded carbon in the vehicles themselves, we know that we'll have to have fewer of them in future. So the kinds of vehicles that we drive around in or we use is going to have to change. And the share that those vehicles contribute to our overall transport mix is going to have to change too, because currently 2/3 of all the trips we make are by car. At the same time, we're flying more. And aviation is one of the fastest growing sectors in terms of carbon emissions that we have. And partly that's down to an economy where we've made it easier for people to fly. We've made it easier for them to fly more often because ticket prices have fallen. And I'm sure you'll all know people who try to fly as much as they can because we're coming, I hope, out of an era where flying more has been seen as a success symbol. So what does all that mean for the critical challenges that we'll have to overcome if we're going to achieve net zero? Well, I think the first one is to work out what's fair. We're all going to have to reduce our emissions, but we don't all have to do so by the same amount and in the same order. So we're used to ideas of fairness about being how much it costs to fill up your car, but actually, not all car trips are essential because many people walk or cycle or take the bus more than people who use their car when perhaps they don't have to. At the same time, that convenience that we all have built into our daily lives, particularly through the rise of the internet, is going to be really difficult to shift. So we know that people really like online retailing, and although they claim to be ever greener, we've seen from the emissions data I showed that actually they're not, because the number of vans on the roads bringing us the things that we buy is growing almost by the day. So perhaps the biggest challenge of all for us is to have a look at our lifestyles, as we'll have to do across the other elements of daily life that you'll consider as part of the assembly. And for transport, maybe we'll have to slow down. Maybe we won't have to travel as much or as far or as fast in future if we're going to reduce transport emissions.